Hello, and welcome back to Talking Maya. Today we are going to continue in our MASH series, and we will be covering the ID, repro, and instancer in a little bit more depth, along with probably a curve node, as well as some comparisons between the efficiencies of mesh networks versus instancer networks. So let's get started. I'm going to start off by creating something of a bowl. I'm going to take this primitive, scale it up, and I think we're just going to use some of the subdivisions here to create just a mess of geometry. So following that, put in the vertex mode. Zoom in way in here. Increase our selection, soft select, so that we get towards the middle, right about there. And we're just gonna pull it up right. We'll decrease our soft select, pull that up a little bit more. We'll call that good. So we have a bowl. We're gonna use this to showcase the ID node. So let's create a sphere, a cube, a cylinder, a cone, and let's go ahead and get a little crazy with it and get a gear. Although with this gear, I am going to reduce its poly count. So we're going to give it maybe 3 height divisions. I want to give it just 6 sides, just so that we reduce our polygon count by as much as possible. So I'm going to select all 5, I can count, 5 of these objects. I'm going to open up my option box, select mesh this time, apply and close, and this will be, let's say, serial mesh. All right, you can see that if we isolate our repro mesh here, currently it has distributed linearly, and we have 5 numbers of points. We can increase that willy-nilly. I'm going to remove distance to it, and we're going to switch to a mesh distribution. Grab our original disk, middle mouse drag it over, increase the number of points. Let's do face centers and flood mesh. Great. Now we have just a million of these objects. I'm going to grab all these original ones, grab my scale tool, and I think we're going to preserve children, scale them. There. I think that should work out better. And hopefully all the rest of them aren't all mucked up. So, okay. So, we now have a bunch of spheres in the shape of our disk, which is wonderful. However, I want the rest of our objects. Like, if we go to our repro mesh, we can see that they're all listed as being in our mesh network. And yet, here we are with dumb old spheres being the only thing here. So let's change that. Let's add an ID node. What that's going to do is it's going to iterate through all 5 of our objects based on their ID number as seen here. And at first, it'll go linearly through them. So we've got this very regular distribution of objects. We can also choose random, which will have certain bunching here and there. You can change your random seed until you get one that you like. You can also do cycle, which appears to do something. That's about all I can say about that. I honestly am not entirely sure what is happening. So cycle's a mystery to me. Fixed, weirdly enough, makes it so that only the first one, or whatever number you put as your attribute here, is seen here. But I suppose it lets you cycle through them at all, which is sort of the point. Before adding the ID node, you had no option but to, work with what was given to you. So, I mean, here's our bowl of gears. Quite lovely. Sort of looks like somebody chopped up a bunch of pencils. So, let's go back to our random node here and go back to distribution. I think maybe pushing along normals might be fun. Just keep going with that. And let's go ahead and unisolate ourselves here. Go back to distribution. Keep pushing it. you can see that it's starting to lift off from its original shape. You're going to get more bunching in the center here when you do your push-off normals. If you go back down to 0, you'll notice that they're actually intersecting with the plane at the faces. Now, that's not very ideal. So, the way you get around that is by kind of doing the same thing over again, but with grouping. So, let's go ahead and turn off this network. And we're going to select our objects here, isolate them, unhide them. What we're going to do is we're going to put the pivot point at the bottom here. I should be doing this per object, but for sake of time, right? And we're just going to snap these to the bottom of the grid. We will then group them individually, though. I wish there was a way to do this over time, but just group each and every single one of them. Take all of those groups, and we'll create a new mesh network called Serial Fixed with some terrible typing. As before, we'll go to Mesh, take our disk, connect that, go to Face Centers, and flood the mesh. With any luck, we will now have that. Yay. Grab our ID node and go through random. You'll notice now that instead of being cutting through like this one, you can see that the plane of the bowl is cutting through it there. We are now sitting nicely on top of it for at least the cylinder. All the rest of them, if you'd been more careful, would be sitting nicely tangent to the plane. And if we open up a group of, say, the spheres, we can now specifically select the object and move it relative to the group so that it is sitting tangentially to the plane. Let's see, let's grab our gear and get that one a little bit closer. I want these gears to be sitting just so, right? Gets a little laggy when you're using mesh. So you can dynamically place them after the fact. You can also dynamically shape them after the fact, but that is a wonderful perk. However, when you get to objects of this many objects, this scale of repetition, the computer whines. The computer whines a little bit. So we're gonna go ahead and stop doing that. However, I believe one interesting thing to do is to convert this to an instance and see how it behaves. So let's go ahead and switch geometry types. We now have the instancer, which behaves very much in the same way. My goodness, those are bright green, and they will not stop being bright green. Oh boy. All right. Instancer. Oh, jeez. Hurts the eyes, but that's okay. So now, if we change the gear, I'm not sure if it will update. Oh, interesting. You can actually hide an instanced object after the fact. And if you translate the group, it will dynamically update as such. So, some interesting effects when you use an instancer. You can still place this, I believe. No, you actually have to move the group. Oh, you just can't? Ah, learning something right now. But any translations, any rotation, I should say any scaling and rotations can be done on the group. Though, yeah. Anyway. So you can tell that the scene is far less laggy with the mesh version, or with the instance version. And when we try to load up the instance version, it is snappy as all get out. I'm going to do a quick Arnold comparison here. So we will grab each of our objects and apply a standard surface. And I believe, brush to metal seems like a good way to go. I'm going to turn off subsurface, even though it's not available, so that works out great. And we'll change our color to something a little bit more suitable. Hopefully that changed it. I'm unsure if it did or not. Ah, well, there we go. When in doubt, hide and unhide. Instancers love that stuff. We're also going to add a physical sky. And I'm going to go ahead and put that, oh gosh. I'm going to go ahead and put that on a layer and make it so I can't select it. So let's grab our Arnold render view and see what's going on. All right. Make this bigger for everybody. So you can see with an instancer, we can zoom right on in. Get some interesting effects here. I think we're going to take our gear group, scale that right on down. Let's take a look at how that's seeming. Right about there probably seems good. But you'll notice it's updating fairly quickly with an instancer. Really get those metallic objects looking pretty nice right now. By contrast, if we turn this off and go back to our original, I believe, maybe it's going to make a liar out of me. Maybe it's more efficient than I think, but it seems to me that the render times are very different between the two. So we'll go ahead and do an actual render live. And I'll do some annotations so that you guys can skip that if you are so inclined. I know I would be. So, uh, yeah. We're going to do the mesh first, and then the instancer second. I'll look at the results when we come back. But I'll be chatting throughout the whole thing. So. Let the renders begin! Oh, wow. This might be done a lot faster than I thought. Oh, boy. All right, so this... Are we set to 1080? That might be a better test. I don't think we are. Okay, so let's set these to 1080 and then redo the test. Let's close this window so it gives us a proper size. The testing again! So the reason I want to use a 1080 render is that it lets us have a broader, like a more substantial time difference between the two rendering sessions. If I were to just do a 540, we might only get a couple seconds difference at best. Might get almost no difference. But doing a 1080 test lets me see if there's like a 10-second difference between. Nearing the end of the mesh situation here. And I just love the way that Arnold looks with a mesh network. It just the amount of time and effort it would take to replicate this by hand is staggering. I would not ever place this many objects by hand. So for comparison, let's go ahead and set up our instancer. We have saved this file. We also have the render time associated with it. Let's give it a go. The other thing we're going to examine is any differences in quality, whether using instancer introduces noise or any other kind of artifacts in the render is something to be aware of. So we're going to take a quick look at that as well. Just anecdotally, it feels faster. Clearly, the numbers will, they will tell the tale. Visually, it doesn't seem any more noisy necessarily. And it looks fairly similar just across the board. So first impressions, maybe faster, not much different. Oh, what an upset. I was truly expecting some major differences in render times, and yet somehow the mesh network actually manages to be slightly faster. So there's really almost no difference between the two of them. So when it comes to rendering, it seems instancing may not affect render time. This was a fairly simple test, so we'll have to do a couple more down the road. But for now, it definitely looks like if you're going to be doing one versus the other, the only reason to use instanced objects is for your viewport experience. So when you're actively modeling, an instanced uh, an instance session is substantially faster. So just to prove that point, so I don't seem like a total goof, we'll turn on both. Go to our distribution, and I think face center will work out better for us. I don't know why sometimes you just can't access the number of points. It's kind of infuriating, honestly. Yeah. All right. Well, how best to do this? Let's go ahead and turn these both off, and let's hide this guy. What's a good high definition thing? So we'll make this guy fairly massive, right? We'll go this big, and we will give him just way too many divisions. Let's say like 3. No, no. Let's go 4. Very, very dense mesh. So if we take our various objects and their groupings, create a mesh network with an instancer, just so I don't immediately break my computer. Call this test just for good measure. Is that good measure? I actually don't know. But we're going to use vertex for this one. We will drag our sphere into the mesh. Oh, gosh. Oh, boy. Oh, really? Yeah? I don't see them. Oh, we don't have enough points. I didn't flood the mesh yet, so that was a lot of buildup for nothing. All right, flood mesh. All right, here's thinking about it. Oh gosh, the bright green. Let's give us an ID node. Ooh. Okay. Oh. She is thinking about what's going on. Oh, that is spooky. Very spooky. Now in its defense, we do have what appears to be 99,000, give or take a couple, actual points to think about with this. So, I don't have the most powerful computer in the world. I'm recording at the same time, so this does appear to be a bit of an unfair test. Let's go ahead and turn this off before we duplicate the network, and we'll select test 1. Use our utilities to convert it to a mesh network, and pray to whatever you believe in up above. If you do, if you don't, it's all good. That this will not crash the computer. I'm building this up a lot, and I really don't know whether or not this is going to truly be a big difference. I felt like it was. I don't know what's it is taking a while to turn on. It is definitely taking a little while. Ooh, okay. So before we were able to rotate it, but it was very laggy. Interesting. Oh, how weird. It's actually more intuitive, more fluid once it's loaded to move around with the mesh instance, basically. And we'll go back to our instancer here. It loads a lot faster, but because it has to calculate the instances every time, it seems that an instancer is actually significantly slower in terms of translating and moving and rotating in the viewport. I think it seems that okay, so here's my postulation then. Instancers are fantastic when you are adding nodes to a mesh network. But if you're doing other things in the viewport and you've got a massive amount of points, it seems that a mesh network actually is faster in terms of moving around in a scene. So my recommendation in that case, of course, is to uh, create your mesh network with instanced objects. And then when you're happy with it, convert it to a mesh, which may take a while. And then all you have to do is wait for it to load, and bing, bang, boom, you've got a pretty, actually, skookum way of moving around. It's pretty amazing. I wish I'd found these things out beforehand, but, here we are. Let's go ahead and take a test render. And if this thing takes a million years, I'll cancel early, but once again, annotations will take you to the next section after this render. For those of you sticking around. Wow! So surprised by those results, actually. I was wholeheartedly expecting the instancer to be the faster scene viewer. It's truly fascinating for me because it's counter to my expectations and to my experiences with uh, other instances of working in Mash. It's very strange. Hmm. Wow, this is really dense. A really dense sphere. Hmm. It's kind of cool how the light is catching all these facets, though. I think if we made everything a cone, then it would have been just overwhelming. But because we've got so many different versions of objects in here, it works out really well to catch all the facets. And we are going to be doing another render here with the instancer just to double check this. I fully expect this to take 57 seconds or 58. I don't know, but it was a remarkable difference in terms of usability. So, yeah, even people who've been using this for a while make mistakes. Apologize for giving some ill advice before, but I believe we've rectified that. We'll go over the curve node after this momentarily. Got a few more seconds on this render, I think. 45. Ooh. Now I'm all confuzzled. So that took 57 seconds with mesh objects, and it took 45 with instanced objects, and no appreciable difference between the two visually. Interesting, interesting. Okay. Well, some more objects and numbers to think about. Okay. Welcome back, everybody uh, who left and used the annotations. We found out that instanced objects in this case actually do render about 10 seconds faster. What is that, 8 seconds? 8 seconds faster. So I don't know what happened on the hoop-a-doop here, but yeah. That was the performance change that I was expecting. So, and I suspect that as you add more complicated shaders, the instanced objects become faster and faster. I think that was my experience with it. So, all right. So once again, let's go ahead and start collapsing these so I can create ever more expanding networks and hide everything and get rid of this shenanigan here. Ooh, hello, Skydome. Okay. So we're going to work with curves now. And I think that a cone is a wonderful way to work with who's it's curves, right? So we're going to give ourselves that guy. We're going to put him all the way onto the grid there. I then want to rotate him in the x-axis, so in this one, so that he's got his butt on the origin point and is pointing forward in the x-axis. I believe that's how I want him. It may turn out that I want him on the z-axis later, but we'll figure that out as we go. So I froze his transformations and deleted his history, and we will now make a mesh network. So this is going to be curve thingamies. Perfect. So let's go to our top view and let's just create an EP curve real quick. EP curves being one of my favorite types. They don't require too much thought, and you can just hold down the X button and really constrain them to the grid. Perfect. We'll smash back over to the perspective view. And I think what we're going to do, we're going to take this curve, put it into control point mode, and get some soft select going again with surface mode. And we'll just start. Ooh, what happened there? And we'll just start pulling this thing into shape. Yeah, that seems pretty good. Alrighty, Roo. So, I think what we need to do in this case is to pull this up to our vertex point there. Perfect. Yeah, close enough anyway. And we'll bring this back down to the grid. I think we're close now. That's good enough for me. So, we've got this kind of loop-de-loop arch that sort of comes back on itself. It's very interesting. I like it. We'll go back into our curve thingamy mash menu, and we're going to create a curve node. Now, by having that curve selected when I went through all those steps, it automatically pulled it into this input curve node uh, attribute section. But let's assume that you don't have it selected when you go in. All you have to do is go back to your curve node, middle mouse drag your curve, and drop it into that, and it works out great. You'll notice that it's not exactly lining up with my curve, and that's because in our distribution menu we have a distance x set. We're going to bring that back down to 0, and you'll see it kind of realign with the curve just fine. I'm going to set this to 500 points. And we have a couple things to do in the curve section. First off, step needs to be put to 1. And in this case, step refers to the percentage along the curve with which it is distributed, or along which it's distributed. Animation speed, we're going to set that to 0. Leave most of these other things alone, although some of them can be useful. They're very wonky, and I don't understand them quite well enough to really tell you about them. Like, the velocity and the velocity noise really have to do with how they're being animated. So when you've got your animation speed, if we put that to 1 and we change our velocity random, each of these objects will have a different speed along the curve, kind of scaling up and down in terms of the difference between them. Velocity noise, similar situation. It just keeps adding some randomness here and there to the velocity. So these are things with animation, so we're just going to kind of gloss over them for now and move back on to some of these other settings. So curve length, if you turn on the animation speed, you can have some more things down here like curve length affects speed. And I think if you have less objects, it actually is more noticeable. Let's go with that. Well. Anywho, the fun thing is when you start having these effects, you can kind of change how they group up around curves and whatnot. And I believe there was like a maximum vector thing. There might be another node. I'm not sure, but let's go ahead and leave that off for now. Calculate rotation is pretty important. Otherwise, they all face in the same direction. And I have not found a single instance of up vector doing anything in curve. So instead, you want to use calculate rotations, which will typically make it work quite well with your curve, but you'll still get some weird normal issues. And if you do, the thing to do is to duplicate your curve and then scale it up. I'm going to go ahead and modify to center the pivot. Scale it like in. Go back to your curve menu, and in this aim curve, take your second curve that you just scaled and plop it in there. Now you will need to increase your roll amount to make that work. And of course, it's not working. Why? What is going on here? That's where you make this thing work one time and it just goes to hell on you. Hmm. Well, I may have to revisit the aim curve at some point because I cannot for the life of me figure out what is going on here. I mean, certainly you need the calculate rotations to be on in order for this to work. The roll amount should be affecting it. I'm not sure why it's not yet. Yeah, and nothing seems to be affecting it very much. So we'll come back to this at a later date. Know that there is a way to make aim curve um, have these objects be pointing at the curve that you designate as an aim curve, and it fixes a lot of the rotational issues you have when you're animating. So again, when we go back to animation, we'll probably cover this aim curve at that point. So apologies about that. This is all kind of rushed, but I really hope that you're enjoying this. Do we want to go? Ah, no. Okay. So I'm gonna end the episode here. We kind of went over what the repro mesh is all about. I believe this one is an instanced. I just want to change that over to a geometry real quick, which I need to. So test one curve thingies, curve thingies, curve thingies. Change this over to a geometry type of mesh so that I can go back into its repro node, point out that we've only got the one object in here. If we were to create a second object, group it just for good measure, and then open our repro node again, we could theoretically drag this in there, add a ID node, and it would be distributed along the curve just the same. And here we go. We can see the stepping that's going on there. If you want a different effect, say random, randomly iterating through them, you can have that. If you want to have one or the other, fixed is the way to go. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. We've also talked about how to use a curve to move things around on a in a mesh network. And again, they do move dynamically if you change the underlying curve. And as before, you can alter the base object after the fact and get some interesting effects that are dynamically applied down the mesh network. So yeah, curve node and ID node more or less covered. We'll definitely be revisiting this at some point. If you have any questions, as always, I have an email address in the description below in the doobly doo, and that's going to do it. So thank you for joining me. Apologies if this was too rambly or incoherent. Just again, tell me. Until next time, thanks for watching. Bye bye.